March 1945, Germany. Patton's jeep was moving at a slow pace through a town that had only recently fallen under Allied control during a routine inspection of the Third Army's forward push. A line of German prisoners was being escorted along the same road. American guards walked beside them, keeping formation tight as they moved the column toward a holding area. Most of the captured men kept their eyes lowered, drained and mentally spent, as if the conflict had already ended for them in every meaningful way. But one prisoner was different. As the jeep drew closer to the marching group, a young German soldier near the back suddenly broke away from the line. Something was hidden in his grip. In a swift motion, he triggered and hurled it forward. A grenade cut through the air, heading straight toward the vehicle. The driver reacted instantly, shouting a warning. There was no room to maneuver, no time left to respond. The object struck the ground less than 10 feet from the front wheel and rolled along the dirt. It failed to detonate. Soldiers nearby rushed in and brought the attacker down within seconds, pinning him firmly to the ground. The jeep came to a complete stop. The driver remained rigid, hands locked on the steering wheel, stunned by what had just occurred. Patton did not move. He showed no visible reaction, no instinctive reach for cover or weapon. Instead, he looked at the unexploded device lying in the road. Then he spoke calmly to his driver, a remark the man would never forget, a dry comment suggesting the German forces could not even produce a reliable grenade anymore. The driver, a corporal named Walter Hicks, did not respond with laughter. The shock held him still, his body refusing to relax even after the immediate danger had passed. After several seconds, he managed to ask whether the general had been injured in any way, concerned about possible fragments or unseen damage in the moment's confusion. Patton simply ordered him to continue driving as if nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. The grenade was later collected from the road and handed over for examination by an ordnance specialist assigned to Third Army headquarters. His task was to determine why a weapon designed for lethal effect at close range had failed completely. His findings were clear. The device was identified as a German stick-style hand grenade, widely issued throughout the Wehrmacht during the war. The failure came down to timing. The internal fuse system required a short delay after activation before detonation could arm fully. In this case, the soldier had pulled the activation cord and thrown it almost immediately, without allowing the mechanism to complete its cycle. Under pressure, fear, or lack of training, he had not held the required pause. As a result, the explosive sequence never reached readiness before impact. The official report described it as a mistake in handling rather than any defect in design or manufacture. The soldier responsible was quickly removed from the prisoner column by the guards who subdued him and taken for questioning at the same collection point where others from his unit were being processed. He was 19 years old, visibly exhausted and physically worn down. His recorded identity was Erich Bauer, serving within a Volkerm formation, one of the improvised units formed in the final stages of the war as Germany's manpower collapsed. These formations drew heavily from teenagers, not yet of standard military age, and older men who had already passed typical service requirements. Neither of the groups involved had received anything close to proper military training before being pushed toward the front lines with whatever weapons were available at the time. Through an interpreter standing nearby, Patton asked why the young soldier had chosen to do what he did. Bauer's reply came only after a long pause. It was hesitant, fragmented, and difficult for the interpreter to fully render with precision. Still, the core meaning remained clear. He explained that earlier that same week, an officer within his unit had told him that any German soldier who surrendered to American forces without first showing some form of resistance would be labeled a traitor by his own family. According to what he believed, that judgment would reach his mother before he could ever explain the circumstances himself. The exact way this message had spread through command channels he could not clearly describe. He went on to say that after his unit collapsed 3 days earlier during a retreat, he had kept the grenade hidden on his person. Since then, he had been waiting for any situation that would allow him to prove he had not simply given up without resistance when the moment came. Patton listened to the translation without interruption. His face revealed very little. No reaction broke through as the account was delivered. When Bauer finished, Patton asked another question through the interpreter, this one more direct. He wanted to know whether the young soldier understood, at the exact moment he pulled the pin and threw the grenade toward the jeep, that he was almost certainly going to be shot immediately by the nearby American guards. Bauer answered yes without any hesitation. He confirmed that he had fully understood and had expected that outcome. Patton fell silent for a longer stretch of time than he had at any point during the exchange. His aide, who had arrived on foot during the brief interruption caused by the incident, later recorded in a private account that Patton's expression during that silence showed no anger. That was what the aide had anticipated. Instead, it appeared as something closer to exhaustion, a kind of heavy recognition, as if Patton had seen a version of this same reasoning before in different places and through different young soldiers over the course of the war. Men who believed that dying in a meaningless way was somehow better than returning home in a way that might be misunderstood or judged by those who would never fully know what they had faced at the front. Patton then instructed the interpreter to pass along a clear message to Bauer. He stated that the officer who had told him those claims about cowardice and family disgrace was either already dead in the collapse of the war or would soon be irrelevant to anyone going forward, including Bauer himself. He added that surviving a lost war and later returning home to tell the truth of it did not represent betrayal toward anyone who truly cared about him. After that, Patton ordered that Bauer be processed through the standard prisoner intake system in the same manner as all other captives from his unit, with no additional punishment beyond normal procedures, despite the earlier grenade attempt. Later, when his aide cautiously questioned whether the use of a live grenade against an American general might justify a harsher response than routine processing, Patton answered directly, without hesitation. He explained that the boy had, in effect, attempted to be killed indirectly through American forces rather than confront his own decision directly, and that even that attempt had failed, just as he had failed to properly prepare the grenade before throwing it. He added that military detention facilities in the United States were never designed nor intended to punish terrified young men for not dying in the exact manner that someone else had instructed them to, especially an officer who would never have to face the consequences of those instructions himself. Within a week that followed, Bauer was moved into a standard prisoner of war facility. He remained there for the rest of the conflict without any further incidents of that nature and was later released during the general processing of German prisoners after Germany's surrender became official that May. Years later, he gave a brief interview to a German researcher who was conducting a broader study on the wartime experiences of former Volkerm conscripts. In that interview, Bauer described the moment with Patton as the point where he first fully realized that the mindset he had been living under, the belief that death in any form was more honorable than survival itself, had been deliberately shaped and spread by people who had no intention of sharing that fate. He also said that Patton's words about the dishonest officer stayed with him for decades afterward. According to him, those words eventually helped him come to terms with a decision that he had carried in silence and shame for a very long time after the war ended, made in a moment of fear and confusion during its final stages. Corporal Hicks, Patton's driver, remained in his role for the rest of the war and never requested a transfer, even after the events that unfolded that day. Over the following decades, he repeated the story many times to friends, family, and occasionally historians who sought him out because of his proximity to Patton. He always ended the account in the same way. He would repeat Patton's remark about the Germans no longer being able to make a proper grenade, using the same flat and almost detached tone that Patton had used at the moment itself. In his retelling, the grenade was never described as anything more than a brief technical curiosity, even though it had landed within 10 feet of ending both of their lives in an instant on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Patton referred to the incident only once afterward in conversation with another general. He described it as evidence that, in the final weeks of the war, the battlefield was increasingly filled with frightened and confused boys carrying grenades rather than disciplined soldiers carrying rifles. He emphasized that the difference between the two was far more significant than many people at home understood when imagining German resistance at that stage of the conflict. He did not mention Bauer by name during that conversation, and the other general did not request further detail beyond the basic outline of the event. The formal review of the incident was completed within a few days. The ordnance specialist findings and the interpreter's record of Bauer's questioning were filed together as a single report and closed without escalation within the command structure. Several guards who had subdued Bauer were later given informal commendations for their quick response. None of them spoke publicly in detail about the incident, beyond confirming in occasional conversations with junior officers that Patton had remained calm and unmoved while the grenade was in motion and after it came to rest on the ground. That account became a quiet story within that sector of the Third Army during the remainder of the campaign that spring. What do you think? Was Patton's response the right one under those conditions? Or should the attempted attack have been met with harsher consequences, regardless of the circumstances behind it? Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.